Buenas noches. That's all I have. It's a real honor to be with all of you this afternoon and to begin our partnership with Cyprus. I want to start off by giving you an overview of who Presidium is and our mission, and talk a little bit about the problem that we're trying to solve, and then discuss what we can all do to make a significant effort to prevent children from being abused or mistreated. And so Presidium's mission is pretty simple. First and foremost, we work with organizations to help them protect the consumers they serve, either a child or vulnerable adult, from any kind of abuse. And so we work in a number of different industries. Essentially, you can break them down into four. One is religious. And so we work with a lot of churches, denominations, to help them and their congregations prevent any kind of abuse or youth within their parish or their church. The second is social service agencies. And so that's agencies that care for children who are removed from their home for an abuse. So foster care and residential, we work with homeless shelters. The next industry is what we call youth development. And so that's organizations like camps, mentoring organizations, community organizations, sports. And so we work with everyone from a soccer league or football league all the way up to national sporting organizations like National Basketball Association, NBA, MLB, PGA golf, and so forth. And then last but not least, we work with schools in education. So we work with K through 12, public, private, and charter schools, as well as universities. And so we work with a wide variety of organizations. Certainly we work with other groups outside of that. So for example, we work with cruise ships and resorts. We work with large corporations that do childcare. For example, Google, once one of their offices gets big enough, they have on-site childcare. And so we've accredited their on-site childcare. And so we work with a variety of organizations. The second part of our mission is to preserve the trust within an organization. And so all of you work within schools who have a really, really stellar reputation and have built that reputation up for years. And what we know about when a child is abused within an organization or a student is abused within school, that is one of the biggest risks that to the reputation of your school or schools. And so what we've seen over the years is when an organization has an incident of children bullying one another or a staff member abusing one of the students, is the organizations get scared. And when they're scared, they don't respond in a good way. And so oftentimes they're not as transparent as they should be. Oftentimes they're not as compassionate as they should be. And when that occurs, communities get angry. And we see that their reputation is put at risk. And so all of that to say is we help organizations do two things: prevent abuse and help them respond in a compassionate, transparent, and confident way if, worst case scenario, there is an incident. And so we have been managing this risk. We have been incorporated as a company for 32 years. We have a wide variety of team members. We can break our team up into two groups, really. It's a consulting, accreditation, and then we also have a product services team. We have well over 5,000 clients, and we've developed pretty comprehensive risk management strategy that has been implemented over the last 30 years within these organizations. So first, I want to hit on the problem. And so what you see here are a number of statistics that show essentially this, that abuse between either a youth to a youth, so a student abusing another student, whether that's sexual abuse, whether that's physical abuse, whether that's bullying, hazing, hazing online, internet bullying, goes on way more than we would like. And adult to youth goes on way more than you would like. And so you can read some of these statistics up here. But basically, overall, about 1 in 5, 1 in 6 females, and 1 in 8, 1 in 10 males will be abused before they turn the age of 18. And what we know about those youth, and you all know, is when abuse occurs, the effects are horrendous. So depression, anxiety, social isolation, medical. And so we all know too well how abuse affects youth and adults. But what we also know is that the vast majority of the time, when abuse occurs, about, depending on the study, 80 to 95% of that abuse does not go reported. So, if you think about that for a second, it doesn't make sense. Because on one hand, you have a child who's going through the horrific effects of abuse. But on the other hand, if they go and tell an adult, so if they go to you and say, I'm being abused, what are you going to do? No, really. Well, what will you do? You will... Okay, I'm going to make an assumption. I'm going to make the assumption that you will do everything that you can to stop it from occurring. And so, in a way, this youth has the power to make it stop. He or she just needs to tell somebody. However, 80 to 95% of the time they don't do it. Why is that? And so, why do you all think that children and also adults are not likely to report abuse? So they feel ashamed. They may feel ashamed that it was their fault because the offender groomed them in a way to make them feel like it was their fault. I heard scared. They may be scared that if they report, that they will get in trouble, that they've been threatened and their family may get in trouble in some way. What else? Confused. They're confused. Depending on the age of the victim, they may not know exactly what occurred. They may not understand fully sexuality and that it was sexual abuse, and maybe they're confused about how their body responded. A lot of different reasons why there's confusion. Why else?
Lack of confidence.
Lack of confidence? In what?
Lack of confidence. The adults that may solve the problem, they just don't believe that they may do anything about it.
So she makes an important point. She says, well, lack of confidence that if I report, that nothing will be done about it. I'm going to talk about one more, and then it kind of bridges to what you're saying as well. So one of the problems, that's not on the slide, but it relates, that we have with this risk is the offender is not a scary person in a trench coat who looks really creepy and is 100% bad. And so this person doesn't go around and kick dogs and threatens everybody. And so 90% of the abuse is done by someone known and trusted to the child, and known and trusted to all of us. And so what is the case is these offenders, the vast majority of their behaviors towards the students are positive. They're very good at getting down to a child's level, interacting with them, being a great teacher. However, 10% or whatever is not good. But it's not abuse. 10% are boundary violations, red flag behaviors. They don't raise to the level of abuse. But see, when we see that 10%, but we also see that 90% of good, what do we have the tendency to do as adults? We see that 10%, but we let that 90% overshadow it, minimize it, excuse it, and we just kind of keep our eye on it, right? Because we're not seeing abuse, and they're a really good person overall. And here's the second dynamic. What victims will report oftentimes is the very best relationship that I've ever had with an adult was with my offender. Because they got down on my level, they talked to me when no one else talked to me, they really understood what I was going through. Now the abuse, which was about 2% of the relationship, was horrific. But the 8% I had never gotten anywhere else. So if I'm a child and I'm being abused, if I report, what am I also scared of losing? The relationship. I'm scared of this person getting in trouble. I'm scared of this person going to jail. So, this statistic isn't really all of that shocking. And so, the shocking statistic isn't 80% of children don't report. The shocking statistic is 20% overcome all of those barriers and are able to report. And so, as adults within an organization, we have to create an atmosphere, do everything that we can to help minimize barriers for everybody to report, especially students. But if all that we do is put our eggs in the basket of, we're going to teach kids on how to self-protect, and if anything happens to you, report, we're putting kids at risk. That's a component of what we need to do, but it's not the whole system. And so, the good news is, so that was the bad news. Bad news. Good news is, this risk is preventable. We can prevent children from being abused within our organization. This is not a natural disaster. And so, I'm from Dallas, and in Dallas we have tornadoes. And there's nothing we can do to prevent a tornado going through our city. Now, what we can do is respond really well if it does. And so we have sirens that go off. And then we have to get into closets and all this stuff to minimize the damages. And so where we see organizations, and in particular sometimes schools, go wrong, is they focus all of their energy on responding once they identify abuse to minimize the damages. And that's very important. We need to minimize those damages. However, if that's all that we're doing, we're treating this like a tornado or an earthquake or a hurricane. And it's not. This is something that we can prevent. And so we essentially work with organizations to do two things to help them manage this risk. One is we help them put the right best practice standards in place. So this is our safety equation. Adriana is going to be talking a little bit about our accreditation. This is what our accreditation is based on. And so how we developed this was we have reviewed well over 4,000 cases of abuse within organizations. We use a methodology called root cause analysis. And when you use that methodology, what you find when you review these thousands of cases is, unfortunately, there's not one cause. So there's not a silver bullet. We can't just say, well, we train everybody, so we're good. Or we educate our youth, so we're good. There's not one reason. But the good news is there's not 4,000 reasons, because that would be an unpreventable risk. Instead, there's 8 reasons why these cases happen. So at the end of the day, your school's goal is to get 100 safety points here. And so under each of these operations, the best practice standards we have, once you meet those, you get the points towards that. And sometimes you may lose points in certain operations, like being able to screen people. And so if that happens, you have to make up points in monitoring and supervision, or whatever it may be. So basically what I'm saying is, it's a dynamic model. However, while these are the things that you need to do to implement within your organization to prevent risk, it's not enough. And here's why. This risk is very unique. Well, it's unique in that it's a low frequency, yet high effect event. Those types of risks are challenging to manage because what happens is you can put all the great things in place. So you become Presidium accredited, or you put all these best practices in place, and then you say, oh, good, we did it. And then you move on to the next thing. And what happens is the awareness for an organization goes way up here. But then over time, we get busy, we do our jobs, we got a lot of things going on, we stop implementing some of these things. And as time goes by, whoops, doesn't matter. As time goes by, we stop doing all these different things. Oh, forget it. When time goes by, our awareness drops. People stop following policy. So, for example, youth to youth, student to student abuse. One of the highest risk areas in schools is bathrooms and locker rooms. And so, if our staff, we put good procedures on how to manage locker rooms and bathrooms, and our staff stop following those. And then what happens is when they stop following those is that youth within that locker room or bathroom, when they stop monitoring, didn't abuse each other. There was no negative consequence. And so that happens again and again, and no negative consequence and no negative consequence. So they're reinforced for not doing their job. But as time goes by, what happens? We break all those policies, and then there's an incident in the locker room. And then what we do is we get on all those best practice standards and we start implementing them again. And so what's equally important within an organization is you implement the best practices, but then you maintain a culture of safety to keep those best practices going on an ongoing basis without having an incident. When we work with organizations and people, we can put them into three categories. When we first started over 30 years ago, and it's still semi the case now, but in the United States in particular, the vast majority of our clients, potential clients, were very complacent. And so what that means is they did not believe that a child could be abused within their organization. And so what we had to really convince them of is no, it happens. It may not have happened to you, but it happens. And this isn't someone else's problem. And so when the Catholic Church had a lot of incidents, everyone pointed to priests and said, well, it's a priest problem. No. In the United States, we had scandals at Penn State, at universities. Well, it's a university problem. No. And so the characteristics of complacency is denying that you think that it can happen, relying on that you've never had an incident in the past. So you've been doing this for 20 years and you've never had an incident. And so assuming that because you didn't have something and it couldn't happen tomorrow. Few standardized procedures, responses are punitive, and so on and so forth. The defining characteristic of this is ignorance. Very dangerous spot to be in. However, eventually you'll get out of this, or people will get out of this, because what will happen is they will have an incident, sooner or later. And usually what they'll jump to is compliance. And so compliance is a check the box. It's, okay, we know we have to do something, and we're going to do training, we're going to have a policy, and then we're going to pat ourselves on the back, and then we're going to move on to the next thing we have to do. And so this is a little better than being complacent. However, it's not enough to prevent abuse. And so the defining characteristic under compliance is being prideful. And so the organizations who have had very, very big incidents, and I don't know if you all have heard of them here, but like the Boy Scouts in the United States. And so we've had a lot of other big ones. And we work now with almost all of them that you've heard on the news. They almost always have a very prideful leadership team, and they're insular, meaning that they did not rely on external experts or external researchers, or whatever it may be, to evaluate their program. And they had big incidents. And where we're trying to get to is a commitment. And so we're not just doing this to check the box. We're doing this to make an impact with the students and the staff in our school that we serve. And so we want to have leadership who's vocal about this, not just once but always, how important it is to protect our students. We want to have a systems approach, like we do with everything else, that says, well, we feel like we provide a safe environment because we have these systems in place and checks and balances. And guess what? We often find gaps. That's a good thing, because we're all human, and we're organizations make mistakes and do things that aren't supposed to happen. And if we're prideful and assume we don't, that just means we're not checking. And so we want to find staff who maybe aren't following policy, so we can correct and coach, because that just happens. And so you can read all of this here, but at the end of the day, this is what our accreditation gets to, is we help organizations put the right things in place, have the right culture to support those things, and truly make a commitment to serving their youth and vulnerable adults in many cases. And so you will find, I'm sure you'll get a copy of this. What you will see here is we've accredited many organizations all around the world. Adriana will talk about that. And the feedback that we receive, we do surveys, shows that leadership, after they become accredited, feel more, that they're better able to identify the gaps, more confident in the systems that they have in place. Their staff are more likely to report concerns. They feel much more confident in regards to how they can respond to those concerns. And so you'll be able to look at some of these details here. I've gone 1 minute over, so that means you have not heard me for 1 minute. Thank you so much.